about what we might see for the next 3 years, especially for Māori out there. So in the end, special votes came down 47% for National. So they weren't able to beat their historic high, which was the Jim Bolger overtaking Labour in, was it 1990? So that's an interesting thing, isn't it? That they just can't actually crack 48% on the day.
Morena, Adam. For me, this election was really about, and our people know, Māori, that there's always been legal corruption in this country. If it wasn't so, then, of course, we wouldn't be before the tribunal trying to claw back the injustices. But what's been ironic about this election is the illegal corruption, the Judith Collins stuff that saw her getting sacked and the revelations in the Nikki Hager book and all the rest of it. So I guess the question for our people is what did that mean for our people? And the bottom line was there was a big swing back to Labour in the Māori seats, yet ironically a swing to National in the mainstream seats. Te Ururoa held his seat, and I tend to think, and I spoke to him last week, it's about his mahi at the electoral level for his people. But overall, you'd think that ex-cabinet ministers like Doug Graham, the ex-minister of Treaty Settlements, being in the dock, and Stephen O'Regan and others at the high level would have brought about some kind of change overall, not them per se, but generally after the book at Judith Collins and the revelations, but no. So it's the same old, and it begs the question, is it for our people?
It is, though, I think that Labour especially don't seem to have actually read Nikki Hager's books, because if they did, they'd understand more some of what was being done to them, just the sort of relentless positioning of messages, the calls to talkback radio, the whole Cosby texter, choice of language, choice of words, and just putting them on the offensive. I mean, there was a great piece, I think, of electoral jiu-jitsu during the campaign where John Key kind of used questions about his credibility, turned them back on David Cunliffe, where he should have been in the gun. Instead, it was Cunliffe's credibility that was put there. But now that we've done all that, we've got the relationship accord agreement. Obviously, Maori Party have been banging on saying that people don't understand what they're doing, and they need to be at the table. Now, if I could play you something that Peter Sharp was talking with Dale, husband, last Friday about the whole thing of being at the table. He was very defensive about it. So you've been a cabinet minister. Peter Sharp has been a minister outside of cabinet. What's the difference?
Well, I think the biggest travesty of the Maori Party are two things. One, having gone with National from their inception, they said it's better to be at the tipu. Our people get that. But there is a table, and the table is called the cabinet table. And the people with the power sit on it. And from the time the Maori Party came to power, they've never sat at the table. Now, they might argue that they can lobby and knock on the Prime Minister's door. They might be in the right committee. But that's not what the cabinet table's all about. And as the first Māori woman to ever win a general seat, I did sit at the table. And I have to tell you, the cabinet table is the table. And I think most of Māori who have voted for the Maori Party have believed that's where they were allowed in the door, but they weren't. And probably the biggest travesty for me is from the very beginning of colonisation, the old Department of so-called Native Affairs at colonisation, right through to when Parikura passed away and Labour left government, the Māori Affairs portfolio was always at that table, always at the cabinet table, until the Maori Party came into inception, and then it became a portfolio outside cabinet and the table, and the room. It's called a cabinet room within a room called the cabinet room, and it has a cabinet secretary who's incredibly powerful in terms of not taking the notes, swearing in Governor-Generals and declaring war. So therefore, it's been a bit of a con, and there's a bit of self-examination required. What makes me a bit angry with our kaumātua, who I respect, is the fact that he said post-election that our people are a bit dopey for having voted the wrong way. He should be encouraging in his retirement our young ones to vote, because in fact Māori votes are down and they're record all-time lows. And even though he claims that being at the table that the Maori Party have never been at and never have been, and taking the Māori Affairs portfolio off it and out the side door, hundreds of thousands of kids, which was an election issue, are still going without kids, without food, and they're our kids. Last week I read in the Herald that there are more families living in cars than ever before. They're our families. More and more of our land, and including with this government this year, we'll see more residential homes and our land, rural land, being sold to foreigners. And how anybody in their right mind that call themselves a Maori Party can blimmin' I'm being polite here, Adam, sign up to that as a coalition partner is beyond me.
Well, I see in the relationship accord with the Maori Party that they're talking about continuation of the work on the Ministerial Committee on Poverty. Now, we really haven't seen that work, have we?
Well, look, fiddling while Rome burns. Look, anybody in South Auckland who teaches in a kura or a kohanga already knows there's too much week left over at the end of the money. That's the reality for our people. So there's been no great gains in all the years Nationals had power. And on top of that, and all the housing crisis and everything, all the statistics belong to us. And we're not dumb. And we didn't vote the wrong way. And I'm not an advocate for Labour. I'm just saying that a kaumātua like Peter Sharples or the Maori Party shouldn't be in a coalition government that's chosen to do nothing about that and let the statistics get worse, on top of the fact that our people are the poorest of the poor in their own nation and becoming progressively more alienated. Look, really what this election was about in my mind at the high level was there's always been legal corruption against Māori in this country. But even at this election, when illegal corruption, our Minister of Justice had to be fired by our own Prime Minister, they're still back in power and are not planning anytime soon to do anything good for our people. And let me give you two examples. It is still the government's policy, national, to get rid of the treaty, and it is still this government's policy to get rid of the Maori seats.
Yep. John Key did say just before the election that would be incredibly divisive, and if he did so, there'd be hikois from hell. That's regarding the Maori seats. But certainly... Still
their policy.
Certainly there were questions being asked by Annette Sykes and so on before the election about why the Māori land courts only been getting 1-year appointments. There's supposed to be changes to the Māori land law, to Ture Whenua Māori, which the people who actually administer Māori land, the incorporations...
What the Māori land court's doing with any nanny or auntie, including myself, that turns up there, and I've only recently put through my own late mum's succession orders, is that goes, go away and form a family trust. In other words, what they're saying is they don't want the Māori land court anymore.
They want it to move it wholesale into trust law.
They want to turn it all into a big form a trust and go away. And our land isn't as simple as that. Furthermore, if you look at the sale of rural land to Chinese, for example, but not only, foreign ownership, it abuts our own land, Hawke's Bay, Ngai Tahu, anywhere you care to look, north, south, east and west. It's not just about our land. It's about what's happening next door and who owns it. And if people from a foreign country, including communist countries like China, own it, it's going to have an impact for us on our tiny little parcels. So it's not good enough for the Crown to try and advise the Māori Land Court to tell the nannies and the succeeders to their own family land, no matter how small, sign up, go away, form a trust, because that will make it even more difficult. So, in the scheme of things, coming back to the issue, I said at the beginning, in New Zealand, from the outset of colonisation, there's always been legal corruption in taking our land. What upsets me at the moment is the illegal corruption, where we see the exposure of our Minister of Justice so bad, Oravida, her relationships with Chinese she won't declare, and etc., being sacked in the middle of a campaign. Key didn't do that lightly. No. And yet, this is why our people are very intuitive, I feel. The swing went back to Labour, and all credit to Te Ururoa. He held his seat for the Maori Party, but I believe, and I spoke to him a week ago, he's passionate about his electoral work with his people there, and I think that paid all for him. So they're here for now, but I'm not sure they'll be here for the future. So, there's still, if ever there was, a place for a Māori movement affecting Parliament. The Greens approved it, but Māori have too. Both Mana and Maori Party, the time has come for our people to unify and actually fight the issues that affect our people directly. And they include all those negative things like, really, do we mind our kids being brought up in cars? Really, do we mind 100,000, and there are kids, going to school with an empty puku? Really, do we mind our whenua, including rural and residential land? Really, do we mind the assets being sold to offshore interests? And if we do, then we do need a movement, just like the Greens, that gives our voice to Parliament.
And you've been a minister for Māori Affairs, or an associate minister, but working very closely with Dover Samuels and Harakura. What advice would you give the new Minister for Māori Development?
Well, the first battle he has to have is to be at the table. For years, there's been a con job from the Maori Party. Forgive us for being with National, but we're at the tepu. If that portfolio is still important to National, and I don't think it is, for the first time in history, that portfolio was taken off the table by the Maori Party. And I don't care what they say about the fact that we deal with it all in the Prime Minister's office or in a committee. Just like a community board anywhere, Hawke's Bay, anywhere our people live, we know the community board doesn't have the muscle that the council does. So the community board might nod their heads, just like the Māori Party, but when it gets to the council, they still put the paru in the sea or the river, or they forget what we're saying. So, there's a real battle here for our people, and if Te Ururoa believes that a government that's really helped decrease all the bad things in terms of Māori success, then the very least he should do is get that old Māori Affairs portfolio back in the room, back on the table.
That's a challenge. Thank you very much, Sandra. That's
Thank you very much.
Valuable.
Bye-bye.